Well, since my review of Transformers the Headmasters for the Famicom Disk System is taking too long, I figured I'd do something else to hold you guys over, and really, I gotta do something. I don't want to leave you with nothing while I'm making the review, so here we go. For those of you who are fans of the Kamen Rider franchise and Tokusatsu, and for those of you who are wondering what this is all about, there's a new show on the CW4 Kids that airs on Saturdays at 11:30 in the morning, known as Kamen Rider Dragon Knight. It's an American adaptation that uses a Japanese-American footage mix, kind of like what Power Rangers does production-wise, and it is based on the 2002 Heisei series, Kamen Rider Ryuki. And no, just because it airs on the CW4 Kids doesn't mean it's produced and licensed by CW4 Kids. They only own the airing rights, just like they did with the Batman and Spectacular Spider-Man when they were airing. Kamen Rider Dragon Knight is owned, produced, and licensed by Atlas Entertainment, Ishimori Productions, and Toei. That's all. So don't worry about 4Kids quote-unquote bastardizing the show, okay? Now I'll explain what the show is about, but at the same time I won't spoil too much, so you're going to have to watch the show to see more on the plot and what's going on. The story involves an 18-year-old young man named Kid Taylor who gets kicked out of his foster's home, and not only he has to look for a new home, he has to look for his father who is missing for a very long time, probably years or so. On his search, he finds a card deck which causes him to see anything that comes from mirrors, which no one else on Earth can see, including a dragon he encounters. Later on, a vigilante appears from the mirrors and tries to get the advent thing from Kit after he saves him and Maya Young, a paranormal investigator, from getting captured by two mirror monsters, because according to the vigilante, if Kit contracts with the dragon, he gets vented. The vigilante later reveals himself as Len, who turns into Kamen Rider Wing Knight whenever he needs to fight. While Wing Knight is fighting, Kid helps out by actually contracting with the dragon using his deck, but he doesn't get vented. He turns into Kamen Rider Dragon Knight. Later, Len explains what this whole thing is about, a war in Ventara, which is a duplicate world that only exists behind mirrors, which is where the Kamen Riders and the monsters and all that come from. Len says that the Kamen Riders were defeated by an evil alien named Xaviax, and he not only stole the Advent decks and gave them to corrupt humans on Earth, but he also took every single life from Ventara and made them his slaves on his home planet. Now he's coming after Earth to get people from there as well. So now it's up to Kit and Len to stop Xaviax from the evil riders, but it's not so simple. A lot of conflicts, treachery, betrayal, and lots of other crazy stuff happens, and things get really intense. Now, what are my thoughts on the show? All I gotta say is that the show is just that damn good. I'm serious. And it is 1,000 times better than that other show. I don't care what anyone else thinks. If you think otherwise, fine. The story is well written, it has a lot of drama, it has a lot of suspense, and the action scenes just kick ass. Kamen Rider has finally redeemed himself in America, and thank God it has. Now keep in mind that this isn't a full review of the show as it is still airing, but I have no doubt that the series will still be an awesome show in the long run. What I like about Dragon Knight is that although it's not a direct copy of Ryuki's storyline, it feels like it was loosely inspired by the Kamen Rider shows from the Showa era, which is from the 70s and 80s, with a little mix from the Heisei era, which is from the present day writers, like Kuga to Decades, shit like that. And they did it right, of course. Xaviax's monsters and his reputation for kidnapping humans similar to what the Shocker terrorist group did in the original 1971 Kamen Rider, in my opinion. And that is because they capture humans to become evil cyborgs, like what Xaviax does, capture humans to become slaves. Also, what they got from the Showa era was the riders getting their own motorcycle props, unlike Ryuki, which they only had the rider shooters, or whatever the hell they called. They also did an homage to the original Kamen Rider Typhoon belt when the riders insert their advent decks on their belts to henshin or change. What they got from the Heisei era, particularly Ryuki, is the lack of the monster of the week, despite monsters appearing, to focus more on drama and shit like that. And you have riders versus riders, but unlike Ryuki, you have good riders versus evil riders. Also, Xaviax is not only like the leader of Shocker, but he's also like a character named in Ryuki called Shiro Kanzaki, because they're both puppet masters. Totally different from what you see in their other show. Sorry about that. Anyway, now about Kamen Rider Ryuki. Ryuki is not only very different from Dragon Knight, but it was also very different from lots of other Kamen Rider shows, including the Heisei shows. If you've seen every Highlander movie known to mankind, you'd probably know where Ryuki got its inspiration from. It did not involve good versus evil like Kamen Rider usually would. It had all Kamen Riders against each other in a Rider War to determine which rider will survive. But I'll save Ryuki for another day. Probably on my planned Radical Games review of Kamen Rider Ryuki for the PlayStation. But I will say this. I'm very disappointed with the ending of Ryuki because of what they did to the main character. Hopefully this doesn't happen to Kit in Dragon Knight. After all, he's the main character named after the show. Although Dragon Knight is an awesome show, I have a few gripes about it. There is a writer in the show named Kamen Rider Incisor, the writer form of Richie Preston, who's a spoiled rich kid. He's too stereotypical for a rich guy, and he constantly uses money puns. They're funny at first, but then they get annoying after a while. Also, I feel that some of Maya's friends from the bookstore she works in don't really serve any purpose in the show. It's like they're just there. Although I could be wrong and they might get kidnapped by Xaviax, which I hope they do. That would be awesome. Two other gripes I have are the recap being like 2 minutes long, which is way too long, and the significant drop in frame rate when using Ryuki footage for I don't know what's wrong. I have no problems with the acting, except maybe with Richie and Maya's friends, but I mentioned those gripes already, so yeah. I mean, they're not top-notch actors, but they pretty much fit their character, and it can be tolerated or accepted. Or both. Overall, Kamen Rider Dragon Knight is well worth the 2-year wait after that beta trailer that came out. And it is a lot better than most kids shows today, including lots of anime dubs that 4Kids did. It's also better than all the Power Rangers shows from Disney. And no, RPM is not out yet, so I can still bash Disney's Power Rangers 6 Ways from Sunday. But most importantly, it is way better than Mask Rider. The show sucks. Don't watch it. It's boring. All I gotta say is that I highly recommend watching it. You may or may not think otherwise when you see it, but at least give it a chance. And if you really enjoy and love the show, please spread a word about the series so that Kamen Rider can be more well known in America and more people can enjoy Dragon Knight here. This includes kids that you know, like sons, daughters, little brothers, little cousins, nieces, nephews, etc. Whatever. You can also get your friends to watch it as well if you want. And to the purists who will hate the show no matter what, all I gotta say is fuck you and go to hell. Just because Mask Rider sucks doesn't mean all Kamen Rider adaptations in America will suck. Anyway, hope you enjoy the show, and again, remember to catch it on Saturdays on the CW4Kids, and it airs at 11:30 in the morning on the Eastern Time Zone, 10:30 on the Central Time Zone, depending on where you live. Thank you for watching, and I will see you later.
Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, together we can fight the fight, let's ride!
Oh, and one more thing. If you're new to the series and you have missed an episode, or if you want to catch up with the series, you can just go to the 4Kids TV website to catch up on all the episodes or of what you miss or what you haven't seen before.